called J.R.R. Tolkien Author of the Century, which I recommend. And truly that is what we're talking about. And in a big way, in a real way, it's J.R.R. Tolkien that has us here today, and he's somewhat the author of many of the things that Josh talked about, the artwork and the inspiration behind FantasyCon. He didn't invent those things, but when you think of a dragon, a malevolent dragon, it's J.R.R. Tolkien's dragon, the Hobbit. When you think of a wise wizard, it's Gandalf. And when you think of a dark lord with evil legions, once again, it's Tolkien. George R.R. Martin, if not familiar with Game of Thrones, acknowledges Tolkien in every way and says that he, or Lord of the Rings, is the mountain that looms over every fantasy story. George Martin also said that he would have left Gandalf dead and that Tolkien would hate his stories, but he acknowledges Tolkien as that guy. So J.R.R. Tolkien not only wrote the book of fantasy, but all the other books that came after a whole lot, including Dungeons and Dragons and video games and all the popular culture things that we have, as well as Star Wars owes a great deal of debt, as does George Lucas to J.R.R. Tolkien. But artists also include actors. That's a very important thing to remember. These guys are artists as well. From the Lord of the Rings trilogy that won all those Oscars and changed popular culture at the beginning of this century, we're bringing Sean Astin, Billy Boyd, and John Rhys Davies to FantasyCon. That's a pretty powerful trio, and we're really excited to have those guys. But we also have, from The Hobbit, most of the company of dwarves. So we have William Kircher, we have Graham McTavish, you have Jed, handsome Brophy over there. Hi, Jed. We have Peter Hamilton. We have Adam Brown. Who have I left out? Somebody? I think nobody.
Sylvester.
Oh, and Sylvester McCoy, who is playing a wizard, an additional wizard. We took Gandalf and Peter Jackson sort of spun him on his head and came up with this madcap wizard, who's also Doctor Who. So that's a pretty impressive lineup from Hobbit and from Lord of the Rings. To my left, over here, is the great-grandson, well, not really here, but on Skype, is the great-grandson of J.R.R. Tolkien, Roy Tolkien, heck of a nice guy, pretty handsome as well. He is unique in all the world of somebody who's been on the set, who's been in the Peter Jackson movies, who knows the film world that made Tolkien even more popular than he already was. But he also has one foot in the literary legacy of Tolkien as well. So he's pretty uniquely qualified to kind of straddle both worlds. And Roy, not yet announced really, but is also coming.
Well, this is Craig Hayes from the Legendary Podcast. Just wondered, with this FantasyCon coming up, have you ever seen anything like this that's comparable to this? Tell me what you're most excited about with the FantasyCon coming up.
I think the giant dragon sounds pretty exciting. I think it sounds like it's a very immersive experience. So, you know, rather than kind of walk around and sort of see things from afar, you can actually join and pick up a sword and have a sword fight, as far as I know, which is what I will be doing. But it sounds like you can kind of really interact with people at this particular convention, and it sounds very thrilling, very exciting.
Tyrant.com.
Tyrant has a question for
both of them.
For both of you.
It's just a matter of how do you guys feel about the more involved parts people will play in interacting with the celebrities, as opposed to just being behind a booth and signing hip chats and stuff.
Did you guys hear that? He's with Geek Tyrant, and he wants to know what you guys feel about more interaction with celebrities at conventions than just staying behind the booth and signing autographs.
Yeah, look, we enjoy interacting a lot more than sitting behind the booth as well. It's much more pleasurable for us, especially having travelled 30 odd hours to some of these conventions, to actually get out there and mix up with people than to be stuck behind a booth.
Do you have an answer to that one?
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan, and if I was going to be going to a convention, I'd want to interact with the Game of Thrones, actors. So I expected, be treated in the same way. Completely, absolutely. Yeah, no barriers, no walls, just complete interaction.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, again,
For
Geek
Jed.
Tyrant.
Yeah,
For
again,
Jed?
Geek Tyrant for Jed. What's your favorite Peter Jackson movie you've been in so far?
Chad, if you couldn't hear, he asked what's your favorite Peter Jackson movie that you've been in so far?
Don't say
Yeah, look, that's really hard. In terms of the most fun, I think the earliest film I did, Brain Dead, which is a zombie movie, that was the most fun I had. I think the best movie was probably Lord of the Rings, the trilogy. I don't think anyone here in New Zealand ever thought that we'd make anything that big, of that quality, so I'd have to say that Lord of the Rings kind of tops them all. The Hobbit's been great, but Lord of the Rings was the first time we'd done a movie, a big fantasy movie and anything of that scale, so yeah, for me, Lord of the Rings is still king.
Carrie Kenner from the Daily Herald, and it seems like both of you have played a really big role in creating fantasy worlds. And I think that's something that's really impressive, to be able to work on creating a different world for other people to experience. What is that process like for you? What has that been like?
I'm going to translate that for Jed. You couldn't hear very well. That was, she wondered what it feels like, what it's like, the experience of creating fantasy worlds, and what have I missed? And just what's the process like and being part of that, of actually creating a fantasy world?
There's an awful lot of responsibility, actually, especially when you're playing characters that are so well known worldwide. I think the great thing about having worked on those movies in New Zealand is the people that Peter has been able to surround himself with. Having Alan and John, the illustrators there, from having illustrated Tolkien's books, having people like Gino and Richard Taylor and the prosthetic artists and all the other artists involved in doing the sculpture work and making the sets. We really do have an amazing team, and so being part of that is a gift, really. You don't get to do films of that scale and with that kind of integrity very often, so it really does come down to the amazing artists.
And one more from Craig Hanks of the Legendary Podcast. Have either of you been to Salt Lake, and are you prepared for the level of geekery that you will experience?
Bring it on.
Jeff, you couldn't hear. He asked if you've ever been to Salt Lake and if you're ready for the level of geekery. I don't know if you guys know, but Utah was voted, or not voted, but it was measured as the geekiest state in the United States.
Wow, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm a geek myself, so I think I'm going to fit right in. The only thing is, if someone can have a horse ready for me, because I can't bring my horse with me. Apparently there's a big quarantine issue with getting it over there. I'm going to need some way of getting around. It's such a big state, so I'm going to bring my horse, but obviously I can't.
We're going to turn it back over to Larry.
So, besides having, as far as we can discover, and we've looked pretty hard, we have the largest contingent of Middle-earth celebrities anywhere ever. I mean, if you went to a film premiere, you might get a few more actors, but as far as conventions go and places where fans can go, we have the largest in the world, we think. We also have coming scholars, the world's leading expert on the musical score of Lord of the Rings, for example, Howard Shore. He'll be here. We have the people who have the license in all the world who actually live and make the One Ring in Layton, Utah. They'll be here. We have lots of Donato Giancola, who's one of the foremost artists, fantasy artists in the world. He's working hard on Game of Thrones, but he's one of the premier Tolkien artists as well. So our OneRing.net is involved. So the scale and scope of our Tolkien presence at this show is to honor J.R.R. Tolkien, author of the century. But that's not all that we have. Those aren't the only celebrities we're bringing. One of the highlights is Rose McGowan, who's on Charmed and Once Upon a Time. We also have Mark Shepard, who's been in mostly every TV series on television, but best known for Supernatural. We have Renee O'Connor from the long-running series Xena, filmed in New Zealand, where Jed hangs out. Jed, did you ever do any? Did you do some Xena stuff?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. There's a lot of Jed Brophy from Xena as well. But that really leads us to our big announcement. And if I cry, no, I'm kidding, but it's like this is a Larry Miller moment where you're like, wow, we just signed the greatest free agent in the history of free agents. From Shaun of the Dead and Mission Impossible and the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies, we are pleased to announce that we are bringing to his first ever convention, Simon Pegg.